Aisha Abid, the ambassador for the British from Pakistan. I welcome all of you to the fifth episode of the British Writers in Conversation. We're extremely delighted and honored to have with us Dr. Rizwan Akhtar, one of the most iconic poets from Pakistan. Apart from being an influential poet, he's also an assistant professor in the English department of University of the Punjab, Lahore, Pakistan. He did his PhD in post-colonial literature from the University of Essex, UK in 2013, and his main area of research has been South Asian literature in English with a sharper focus on the Indian and Pakistani writers. He's equally interested in post-colonialism, gender studies, feminism, and modernism. He has presented numerous papers in the international conferences which were held in Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, and Sweden, covering research fields as diverse as crime fiction, adoption studies, and modernistic aesthetics. His first collection of poems, Lahore, I Am Coming, has received a huge acclaim, tremendous acclaim on national as well as international forums. We're just going to talk about it in a while. Also, after the publication of Lahore, I'm Coming, he has continued publishing poetry in international magazines and he has responded to the pandemic in his most recent work. In July 2021, IES hosted an online event where Rizwan's work on pandemic was discussed by a panel of international scholars. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us today.
Thank you, Aisha.
So, first of all, I would like to know at what point in your life did you discover that a poet in you? You have been writing. So, has writing verses been a passion from the beginning of time, or did you develop a love of writing at a later stage in life?
Well, I don't think so. I would say now that it was a passion, earlier. But you use the right word, discover, because Robert Frost says, the American poet, that writing poetry is discovering yourself. So people discover themselves one way or the other. Some people discover themselves through the ways of the world. I mean, some people discover themselves, through something different. Let's say poetry, art, painting, whatever you call it. So I don't think so. In the earliest of the phase of my, when I was not exactly writing, but wanted to write. Let's put it like that. It's a sort of a long incubatory phase, in which I was reading mostly our own literature, our regional literatures, literature, and and literature by the mystics. You see, specifically this area of Punjab. So, uh, but I think that as I came across many poets belonging to different parts of the world, uh, I did find, a sort of a, increasing convenience, I would say, uh, with language as a reader. And later on, when I started writing, this convenience became, more sort of a empathy, and I began writing, but it took a lot of time, obviously. Now you can say that the element of passion has definitely, it has definitely taken a place in my writings.
I see. All right, that's wonderful. Let's come to Lahore. I'm coming, which, according to Dr. Shahid Das, if I may say, is the most beautiful love song of Lahore. Would you like to share how and why has Lahore as a city been the main focus of your verse?
Right. Well, first thing first, I was born in Lahore. It's like,
Mhm.
if somebody says that poetry or something is in your bones, in the same way the cities are, where the place of your birth, where you're born. I'm from the inner city of the Lahore, what you call Androon in Urdu, or you call inner city, and my ancestors have been living here for like more than 400 years. You see, so on the outskirts of Lahore, and then later on, what you call Lahore of the Mughal era, and then on and on. So there's a lot of history actually. So first thing first, you see, Lahore is a city of my birth. I spent my childhood here with my grandparents, with my parents, and I have been roaming the streets of Lahore. All those places you see, the historical places like the Royal Mosque, the Lahore Fort, the shrines, and all that the most inner you say part of the city. So it was perhaps little became a part of the DNA actually. The Lahore become the part of the DNA. There's some sort of a there's some sort of a gravitational pull actually the city holds, and it's irresistible actually, because there is so much history and culture, and there's so much nostalgia actually the city evokes, that I think even an outsider could not resist it. So I'm an insider. But when I went abroad, of course the purpose was academic or studies, you see. And I started looking at my birthplace from a more panoramic perspective, you see. So I roamed other cities, you see, other cities, the European cities, the Western cities, and naturally, the comparison, you compare cities. I mean, I've written about other cities, just like I've written about Belfast, I've written about London, I've written about Aberdeen, I've written about Denmark, North European. So all these cities come along the mental, landscape. But at the heart of the heart is the city where you're born. So it becomes a kind of a nucleus and a kind of a metaphor also. A very, so it's still, I would say, it's a kind of a sustained metaphor. I mean, I do not stop writing about Lahore. I'm not writing much, for the last 6 months, but the two poems that I have recently written, one is again about Lahore, the arrival of the winter in Lahore, but in a very different context, you see. So the Lahore never goes off the mental, lens actually. It will never go off. The city is, it's like that the city actually evokes poetry. It's that the city evokes language, in tandem. So we see that, and if you look at the title, it's like that somebody's returning to the city. You return to your roots, actually. You return to your home. So you felt also homeless away from the home. So it's like of a journey. So something like that.
I see, I see. It's a marvel that there is a diversity of theme in Lahore I Am Coming. However, the most fascinating is your obsession with language. So, as a
Mhm.
poet, how does language attract you as theme?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question, but it's a very relevant question, and it's a question that any reader or student or practitioner of modern poetry does encounter. Because if you start with in English writers like Eliot, I mean, Ezra Pound advise modern poetry is make it new, and Ezra Pound also says no superfluous words, no adjectives. You see, it means that modern poet really has to make sure that his language in his hands, does not become again, taking Ezra Pound's word, superfluous. You see, it means that his real trial is also language, because it's not that it has not been for poets of the classical period or romantic period. Every poet in his time uses language in his own way. But I think that language is something that sparks experience actually, because behind word there is a world actually. So you just hear a word, you just listen the word, just like you hear or listen noise. In the same way you hear language, the word uh, grapples you, it grasps you. Well, this is Heaney's prose work. Its title is very, very interesting. It's the government of tongue. Is that how the tongue or the language governs? So I think it's the language that propels experience. It's the language actually which creates poems actually. So much poetry is actually about language. And in other words, so much poetry is about poetry. It means that how the poem comes into being and how the language contributes to that. And if a poet is not conscious of that, then I think, I mean, he may cut a sorry figure in these times, because you're not supposed to take liberties with language. You are supposed to you're supposed to economize, but economize doesn't mean that that you're not supposed to use more than one word or two word. I mean, you still have that license being a writer, but I think you need to be very careful that you are not misleading your own experiences, you see, and you're not misled by it. So I think that you use the word obsession. I think it's okay, but I think more than obsession, I think it's like a preoccupation. Actually, it's sort of a responsibility. It's a sort of to be responsible, to not to rein in, and to say things, which you should say, instead of you're putting your reader's life into hell. Although recently in an event, a scholar from Islamabad said that, well, this is not a reader-friendly poetry. I mean, he may have reasons for that, because when you come across language, you do sometimes feel yourself bogged down into it. But I think that's what actually the poetry is, and I think, if I'm not wrong, Wallace Stevenson once said that there's a lot in a poem which you never understand. There's a lot in a poem which always remain obscure. So I think that we as the readers, we also need to understand that, okay, the times in which a writer is writing is very important. I mean, it reminds me of Philip Larkin. He says, "Deprivation is to me what daffodils are to Wordsworth." Actually, so Wordsworth was writing about daffodils. Larkin was writing about 50s, 60s England. Eliot was writing about that. It's just like Fazil McFaz was writing about that. So every poet has his context, and I think language has to do a lot with that.
Silence has been one of your intriguing themes. So, as a
Yeah.
poet, how do you view silence?
Yeah, I think that when you talk about language, obviously you also talk about silence. You see, the other way around.
Yeah.
The antithesis perhaps of language. But obviously, silence in poetic terms is something that is of a more metaphysical or philosophical nature, I think, and it's the silence of different sorts. It's a silence which has layers. It's a silence actually, which also means language sometimes, because sometimes language is also futile. And if people who are familiar with the modern literature, and if they read writers, you see, like from the absurdist tradition, or existentialist, tradition, they would understand that how these writers actually, how these writers use language. I mean, it looks as if language is futile, and we are all actually in a sort of a pool of silence, you see. So I think silence for me has different sort of, it has a variegated appeal for me. I mean, when you are silent, it doesn't mean that you are always silent. And sometimes when you are silent, actually, it doesn't mean that you mean it to be silent. So silence is a kind of a protean term, I think. If you look at it from a critical perspective, actually.
All right. So before we move on to your later creations, it would be lovely if you would recite a poem from your creation, Lahore, I'm coming.
Okay. So you want me to recite from Lahore I'm Coming, the book?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Just give me a moment.
All right.
Right. Okay. So there's a poem that's again on Lahore. It's published, if I recall, in Poetry New Zealand 4, 3, 5 years back. Its title is Lahore 2009. The city is still mine. I sneaked it from my grandfather's diary, holding his finger, when the morning azan throbbed at our door. Its street is the vendor's junk food of words, fried with a smattering of chilies and garnished with Punjabi. Words drop into another's words. The city keeps a tighter lingual embrace and suddenly unclasps beyond the borders of courtesy. Tales of elopement and wedding couplets mix well with the cow dung dross of the Ravi. Rough but innocuous, it's ultimately a decent courtesan, well versed in the art of betel leaf chewing and garlands of night blooming jasmine. She danced with and without anklets, Her spidery luxury was encased. Sometimes the dust storms hurt the eyes, and history is censored behind the dying foot. Thou lips are dried with heat. It lingers as if ghazal is brewed in wine. On the dust dabbled horizon, a cordless kite plummets at the mercy of its chasers. Chase it, hunt it. Lahore 2009.
Thank you so much, sir. That was indeed a wonderful poem. So, coming to your post Lahore Oncoming creations, do you think that your focus has shifted to some other themes in your later poems?
Yeah, I think one can say that perhaps it always happens with writers, you see, as time progresses, they do respond to things happening around them. I think that now the focus is still on the city somehow, and it's accompanying life or realities. But I think that I have responded to the pandemic and the lockdown and these more recent things, you see, which has actually affected the whole world, not to speak of many countries where the havoc was colossal actually. And I think that this is a predicament actually which writers have been addressing even in the past, whether it's a natural calamity or a pandemic like this. So they have always, responded to these sorts of calamities and tragedies, I would say. So I have also, but I think that the Lahore Coming came in 2017, and after that, I have a ready manuscript, but as we see that there are no to look for publishers. I have been writing poems. I have also written ghazals in English, and I'm a great admirer for Agha Shahid Ali, one who introduced this form to the Western audience and American readers also. And apart from writing ghazals, you see, I have also written lyrics, and but I have responded as coming back to the point of the pandemic also.
Definitely. Sir, our viewers would really like to know when your next collection would be coming.
Well, I wish if I could give you the date, but so far there is no such thing, unfortunately, because as I said that, I'm looking for publishers, you see, and let's see, but I have a ready manuscript.
Mhm. All right. Sir, you have so many years of teaching as on your credits. So, how would you describe yourself as a teacher in the classroom?
Well, I think it's the students who are the best actually to describe a teacher. I mean, a teacher can hardly describe himself, I think. But well, I think that I have always enjoyed my work as a teacher. I mean, I came into this profession, you can say with choice, I mean, so there was no pressure, there was no compulsion, and over the years at the university, I think I have the opportunity of teaching different courses. I do teach poetry, a lot of poetry to undergrads, you see, specifically American poetry and 20th century British poetry. One of my favorite is obviously Heaney. And I think that teaching is a challenging job. And if you're teaching poetry, that the genre, that's perhaps even more challenging, because students, who come from different backgrounds and they hardly have any, idea of, you see, first thing, I mean, of literature and then poetry in English, you see. So I think that I enjoy it because I also mix up with my lectures with Urdu literature and give examples from Urdu poetry and other regional languages. So I think so you have to make, to make them, to make it more palatable and congenial, you see.
All right. Sir, you have known the British for almost its commencement, and you have also reviewed the first volume. One of your poems, it was titled Diggin, has been published in volume 2. So, what do you think about this idea of connecting writers from all over the globe, and how do you think that it would be beneficial for the writers community?
So you're talking about the poem Dig in the Bridge.
Yes, yes, you have published your poem
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
in.
yeah. The Bridge published it, yes. Yeah, but it's a dig in, yeah. And I have also mentioned Heaney in that poem, because it was Heaney actually. It was his first poem, Digging, actually, which is a paramount influence on me. I'm such a great admirer of this great poet Heaney, I think, and have always been a kind of a felt a kind of a kindred spirit with him, although, you know, he's a poet of the supreme pedestal, actually. And so, if you're talking about the poem, you think that you're talking about the idea of digging in, something like that, or maybe I haven't conceived the question. Sorry.
I'm talking about how do you perceive bridge and how do you think this idea of collaborating different writers from all around the globe has
Yeah.
been attached to the bridge?
Oh yes, I think so. I think it's a wonderful idea. Obviously, it's a wonderful platform, and and it's a much needed initiative. You people have taken, and you have, because in Pakistan specifically, if you talk about poetry, there are no platforms actually. I mean, poetry written in English language actually, because there's a lot of people writing fiction being published, fiction being appreciated, and and being critiqued. But I think the Bridge is a wonderful platform for international poets, actually, a sort of a camaraderie of English poets, poets writing in English. So definitely, I think that this is a much needed, initiative. And I think that more and more, I think, because I was looking that earlier you started perhaps collaboration with Malaysian writers and then American writers, and now perhaps there is an editor coming from Nigeria. So I think this more, you say, internationalization of the magazine, or of the Zine, and this sort of crossing borders, you see, is something that in itself is a spirit of literature, actually, and the people who practice literature.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Sir, as a poet and a role model, what advice would you like to give out to our young emerging writers? How do you think that they can improve their work?
Yeah, I think at this stage, while I'm still myself is actually writing, I would say that I think if you read more and more, I think it will be helpful. I mean, so many young people, they are full of talent, but I think enthusiasm is one thing, but I think that uh, the habit, to cultivate labor is also as important as enthusiasm, actually. So I think that if you have enthusiasm, that's wonderful, what you earlier called passion. But I think perhaps it's more important actually to just to be there, to be patient actually, and to read more and more. I mean, the more you read, don't write, just read. A stage will come when you will write actually. I mean, you don't really need to push yourself to writing. So that Wordsworth famously calls spontaneity, actually. And I think it's still the for me it's still the golden rule. I mean, if there is a gift, the gift will come out. There's nothing that can stop it. I mean, it's like a spring. It will just burst out. I mean, you just need that epiphanic moment. You need that moment actually, and to wait and to have that patience actually, and of course the humility actually. And that's why I like Heaney very much. You have to have that humility in you, that look, if you are endowed with some sort of a spiritual gift, because language is a spiritual gift in my view. And if you're endowed with that, I mean, this is bound to come out, and this is bound to grace the world, and this is bound to make the world a better place. We know that. And that I mean that's what actually the perhaps the function of the poetry is. And he said that I can't think of a case where poems change the world, but what they do is they change people's understanding of what's going on in the world. So I think that every young person who wants to write, actually, he must not get eclipsed by the falsifying notions, you see. And just to be there, you can't be on the driving seat on the day one, actually. So you need to wait and see. I mean, how the road is long, actually. And it takes time, in fact.
Definitely. Very well. So before we end this interesting session, can I please request another recital from you before we head to our conclusion?
Okay. Now, I will read a poem in which I have responded to the pandemic, but I will have to, because I saved it on my computer, so I just have to look for it quickly before I recite that. So you just have to give me a moment. Uh, yes, this poem is published in an American, journal, Three Quarks Daily. It's a very well-known journal. The end of pandemic. When the silence will be over, poets will compensate. Till then, words depart. Love needs a pause. Whatever lost, meanwhile, is kept in minds microchipped. But bodies went to graveyards. Memory is a dug up hole. Beeping monitors rest. Comes another. Cities are chosen. Who said they are unreal? Skyscrapers stand arrogantly. In squares, pigeons congregate, picking food humbly. From a distance, God's watch. They have not stopped breeding. We are not short of myths. The written word will return. Ears are on strike, eyes watchful. The end is certainly open ended. The end of pandemic.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a lovely point. Sir, is there anything that you would like to say for our viewers, for our listeners? Any message that you would like to convey from the bridge?
Well, I think it's a little difficult to give any message actually. I would just say that, I would just say one thing, that being a writer, what I have so far seen is that it's very important actually to be truthful to your experiences, and if you want to make some difference, be truthful in narrating your experiences, and if you think that there is a fraction of creativity in you, it must come out, no matters how difficult it is. So, and I think it's not just the pandemic, but overall, the situation in the world, and of course in our own country, which has been for certain reasons, been a society where things have been really ups and down. But that's everywhere. I think that we should show resilience actually, and we should keep plotting what you say, and it's always good to be hopeful, but it's always good also to keep your eyes and ears open actually.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, sir. It was wonderful listening to your magnificent experiences, and we hope to have your delightful presence and participation in our multiple discussion portals for the bridge. Uh,
All right.
thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
And
Aisha, and thank you everybody, the team, for inviting me for this session.
thank you. I hope that all of you have enjoyed and learned from Dr. Rizwan Akhtar's views on creativity. In the end, I would like to remind our viewers that the Bridge is an absolute platform that is striving to facilitate the amateur as well as the published writers. And there is an abundance of creative writing challenges that you can enjoy. So please visit our website www.bridgethenations.com. Also, stay tuned for more interesting content. Subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much. We shall see you in the next episode.